When we broke on yesterday, I believe that the last question that I asked you was how it was that you went about targeting what phone numbers, for instance, to listen to when you are investigating or conducting an independent investigation of unindicted cases that you receive from law enforcement. Would you explain to the jury how you go about doing that?
Well,
I think he already answered that question yesterday.
I think that there was the objection at the end of the day. So I think that was, he had not completed his response.
My understanding is that he did, and so I'm going to object on asked and answered.
Sustained.
Mr. Sprinkel, where is it that you get the information from regarding what numbers to look for in Securus as you began to look into how to make your decisions in investigating independently cases that you receive?
well, there's a few areas. The first is looking at the numbers that the inmate called and running each number individually to see which numbers the inmate actually called versus which numbers another inmate called using that inmate's pen. That's the primary way.
And if you slow down just a little bit.
All right.
Go ahead.
But the other way is I would, if I had, for example, from intelligence that's gathered during the investigation, for example, if cell phone records were obtained by the investigator or by me, however they were obtained, I'll go through, for one of the parties involved in the case, I'll go through them and I'll generate a list of phone numbers from those phone records. And what I'm trying to do there is run every phone number that occurs in a party of interest phone records through the jail call system. Because I'm not oftentimes just looking for phone calls from people that have been actually charged with the crime. I'm also looking for phone calls from people that may know something about the crime and that those phone calls are placed to those people in close temporal proximity to the homicide or event that I'm interested in.
And how, when you speak about the fact that there are some calls that are made off pin and some calls that are not, how do you determine when a call is made by a person that you are actually seeking to gain information from?
There's a number of factors that go into that. One of the most basic and easiest to explain would be I just recognize the voice. If we're talking about the inmate, like if I want to verify that it is in fact an inmate that I'm interested in that's placing the call, then I just develop a familiarity with their voice through various means. Wherever I can find a known exemplar of their voice, then I listen to that and I learn their accent and the tone and tenor of their voice. And that based on a few other things, like, for example, how often the inmate customarily calls this number. If I know that that number belongs to somebody that's a close family member or friend of the inmate, then that's another thing that is kind of an indicia of reliability that is, in fact, the inmate that's calling that number. But I think the primary thing is just knowing their voice.
Is it a common practice to, once you have done these things that you've described for the jury, for you to then talk to people that have not been identified?
I couldn't hear what you said because y'all were both saying something at the same time. Objection, what?
Leading, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Is it a common practice for you, once you have done all these things that you have described for the jury, for you to talk to people or endeavor to talk to people that have not previously been a part of the case file?
Yes.
Now, when you do that, is that something you do alone, or do you do it with the lead detective or your investigator, or a combination?
A combination.
Okay. How often is it that you have actually found people that you had not previously identified as a part of the case file, that were people you sought to obtain information from to further investigate a case?
I'm going to object as to relevance, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay. When you actually do locate a person and go and talk to them, do you put that in some kind of memorandum or recording that you preserve to provide to the defense?
Generally, if not invariably and always, I at the very least record the interview unless it occurred in such a circumstance where that was not possible, such as at random and it was unplanned. But if it's an interview that I'm actually planning, then I would audio record the interview, unless I don't believe I've ever actually had an occasion where the audio recorder failed, so I wouldn't even say barring the unforeseen, like the audio recorder failing. So yes, I would always record it.
And do you also provide supplements to the case file that you receive from the police?
Yeah, not in every case, but particularly if it was a case in which I did a lot of extra investigation, then I would write a supplement usually.
When do you do what you just described are called extra investigation? In what circumstances would you do what you call extra investigation?
Well, if it was in,
and you can explain to the jury.
In my estimation, if the case needed more investigation, if it needed extra investigation, if after reviewing the case file, I found that the evidence was lacking and that it wouldn't be appropriate to present the case to a grand jury, let alone take it to trial, then I will conduct a quote-unquote extra investigation, as I called it, hoping to find more evidence to make the case better or otherwise dispose of the case appropriately.
Now, let me ask you this. What about people that have already been interviewed by law enforcement? Do you ever go out and interview those persons after receiving a case file?
Your Honor, I'm going to object again as to relevance.
Let's go ahead and move on to more targeted questions, please.
When you receive a statement of a purported witness in a case, do you take the statement given to you in the case file as all that witness has to say, or do you ever endeavor to go speak with them yourself?
Sustained.
Do you do anything with the witness statements that you receive in your unindicted cases that you get from law enforcement?
Objection, relevance.
Your Honor, that goes directly to his practice, his way of conducting investigations into the cases that he then makes other decisions for, and it goes to how it allows the jury to gauge his practice, his...
Counsel approach, please.
Did you work with Detective Thorpe on the case involving the murder of Donovan Thomas Jr.?
I did.
And in working with Detective Thorpe, do you recall when it was that you received the police file from the Atlanta Police Department?
It would have been late 2015 or in early 2016.
Did you document when you received the case file from Detective Thorpe in a memorandum or report that you provided as part of the case file?
Yeah, it'd probably be this report.
Don't hold it up. Don't hold it up.
Well, anyway, this report right here that I brought to the stand, the 140-page one.
140 pages?
Yeah, I believe that's how many pages it is.
Okay.
Yep, 140 pages.
And did you, would you look at that if you need to refresh your memory about when it was that you received the case file from the Atlanta Police Department?
Yeah, right here, in fact, January 2016. It's the first 4 words of the report.
All right. Once you received the case file from Detective Thorpe, without going into what was said by this person, did you notice a witness or identify a witness that you wanted to speak with further?
I did.
Who was that person?
Spencer Wright, a.k.a. Nicholas Robinson.
All right. Now, Wright or Nicholas Robinson? First of all, why are you saying AKA Nicholas Robinson?
Because
And tell the jury.
well, that was a name he provided contemporaneously with an October or a September 2015 arrest, I believe.
Of himself or someone else?
Of himself.
All right. And is that person a person who had a statement already inside the case file you received from the Atlanta Police Department?
He did.
All right. So if there was a statement by that person already inside the case file, why did you want to speak with that person? Or did you want to speak with that person again?
I follow-up questions.
Say that again?
I had more questions, follow-up questions, other questions that after reviewing the case file that I had that hadn't been previously asked by the Atlanta Police Department.
And is it common when you have questions that haven't been answered in your regular course of reviewing cases to locate those persons, to ask them more questions?
Yes.
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
How did you locate Spencer Robinson, AKA Nicholas Wright?
Spencer Wright was
Spencer Wright, AKA Nicholas Wright.
Spencer Wright was an inmate at the Atlanta City Jail, located next door to the public safety headquarters at 226 Peachtree Street, which is like 2 blocks away.
How did you find out that that's where he was?
Well, I don't recall exactly. I knew that that's where they housed him after he was arrested in October of 2015. Somebody told me, I'm sure, that that's where he was, or my investigator found that's where he was. At any rate, that's where he was when I wanted to interview him.
Now, at the time that you received the case file from Detective Thorpe, had there been arrest warrants taken out for individuals?
Yes.
Who were the arrest warrants taken out for at the time that you received the case file?
Kenneth Copeland, Antonio Sledge, Demiki Garlington, and Shannon Jackson.
Shannon Jackson, does he have any other name?
Shannon Stillwell.
And when you received the case file, did the case file have in it more than a written report? In other words, did it consist of audio interviews, surveillance, anything like that?
It did. It had surveillance video, had a written report drafted by the lead detective, among other things. But the key things were the written report drafted by Detective Jim Thorpe Jr. of the Atlanta Police Department, the surveillance video that depicted the incident, another surveillance video from a gas station. I believe I had that in the initial case file as well. Some crime scene photos, I believe, may have been in there. Mm-hmm. Although I do recall obtaining more some point later. But and audio from interviews, some cell phone records. I don't recall every single thing that I had. I didn't obtain the entire case file immediately, because I recall throughout the course of my work on this case, consulting with other investigators with APD and obtaining little pieces of the case file as I went along. But
Hold up, stop.
yeah.
All right. So, would you back up, and I'll use one of my colleagues' words, and unpack what you just said a little bit for the jury?
Regarding the murder of Donovan Thomas, I had audio interviews from some of the people that, if not all of them, that Detective Thorpe interviewed as part of his investigation and his report, and surveillance video.
All right. And so slowing down a little bit, you said you did not have all of the case file, that you got other information from other investigators?
Well, I guess that's how you define case file. I had what Detective Thorpe provided me, but there were other investigators at APD that had been working on this matter. And so
were those other investigators, the information you sought to get from them, were they not in or part of the file Detective Thorpe gave to you?
Right. I remember in particular, there was a lot of cell phone records that I obtained from another investigator that I did not obtain from Detective Thorpe. And that, if specifically when I say another investigator, I'm talking about Tyrone Dennis.
Okay. Now, if you would, slowing down a little bit more, If you would, please tell the jury how you determined that Detective Dennis had information of interest to you in this case.
Well, I met with Detective Dennis sometime in, I believe it would have been January 2016, sometime in early 2016.
Did you meet with him with Detective Thorpe?
No, I believe it was Detective Dennis and Lakia Gaither, and I met them at the Atlanta Police Department's public safety headquarters in a large conference room.
Okay. Okay. Pause. So, when you first got this particular case with the individuals listed that you just named for whom warrants had been taken out, did you follow the same procedure that you described yesterday for the jury to gain additional information
Yes.
in order to assess the case?
Yes.
Was there anything that you knew personally about any of the people who were, for whom warrants had been taken, that made you decide to go out and seek additional information in this case?
Are you asking me, did I personally know the defendants, the people that the police charged?
Yes.
No, I did not know them.
Did you have, did you know when you got the case filed when it was that Detective Thorpe had talked to Spencer Wright?
It would have been in October of 2015 on the night of his arrest.
And did you have, as part of your case file, information that immediately after talking to Spencer Wright or Nicholas Robinson, that Detective Thorpe took out the warrants for the persons you just named?
So Spencer Wright was arrested on October 19th, 2015, the same being the night that Detective Thorpe, among others, interviewed him. And the warrants, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, were taken out October 20th, 2015. For the 4 defendants that I referenced earlier for the murder charges.
Where did you have surveillance video from in the file that Detective Thorpe gave you?
So there was a from what I recall, 2 surveillance cameras mounted on the barbershop located at 330 McDaniel Street. And then you went about maybe 100 or 100, maybe not even 100 yards away. There was a gravel lot and then a street. There's a Texaco station, McDaniel and Northside Drive. And I had surveillance images from that station.
Were you personally familiar with that location? Have you gone out and personally seen it?
Yes, I've been to that location before, yes.
After you got Detective Thorpe's file, did you find yourself out there again, or did you go use what you had to make any kind of determinations?
Yeah, I drove by there a couple of times, a few times, as I looked over the case just to get the lay of the land, because you can only see so much from Google Earth.
All right, so backing up, when you say you drove by there a couple of times, did you just like drive down the street, or did you stop? What did you do?
I drove down the street. I would stop and I would just take a look at the lot just to get a kind of, rather than the 2D perspective that you would get on, like I said, Google Earth. I wanted to just kind of see where all the buildings were situated and that kind of thing. I mean, I didn't get out and like linger around, get out of my car and like linger around or anything like that. I didn't really see any reason to do that. But yeah, I did like survey the crime scene.
Why did you do that? Why did you go out there if you already had the surveillance footage?
Again, just because it's one thing to look at a scene on a screen, where you can get some 3-dimensional perspective from the images. It's quite another to actually be at the scene and not be staring at it in 2 dimensions from a computer screen. You know, you get to see, you know, where somebody's view would be obstructed depending on where they were standing and that kind of thing.
Okay. Is that the only thing that you get of value by going out to a scene after you get a police file? Like,
yeah.
Where somebody's view would be obstructed, you're allowed to tell the jury what value you gained from going out to the scene.
Well, I mean, it's just important to see where the the crime actually occurred. Sometimes, particularly if it's like in an apartment complex, going out to the scene, you can do a witness canvas, start knocking on doors.
Did you do that? Have you done that?
I have. I didn't do it in this case because this occurred on a public thoroughfare.
Okay.
But yeah, anywhere where there's a homicide, where there's a lot of people, like pretty much an apartment complex or a neighborhood, I found that can be beneficial.
All right. Did you also mention Google Earth earlier?
I did.
Why did you mention Google Earth?
Well, Google Earth, in this specific case, I went to Google Earth because I did eventually end up interviewing Spencer Wright myself.
Without talking about what he said.
Right. And right. Well, I'm not even going to get into what he said. I just went to Google Earth to take still shots of images that were photographed by those Google Earth vehicles, I guess, just so I could show them to him and say, okay, well, where were you at this time when you said you saw this, et cetera?
Okay. And had he said those things previously in his interview with Detective Thorpe? Had he given the information of where you were at this particular time? Without saying where he was, had he given that?
He offered a verbal description of where he was.
Did you capture whatever it was that he said verbally in the Google Earth photos that you then chose to show to him?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Objection, what?
Hearsay, Your Honor.
Overruled.
After listening to Detective Thorpe's interview with Spencer Wright, did you attempt to find on Google Earth where it was that he was located?
I did.
Were you able to locate an area that coincided with or matched the area he described being in?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to any reference to statements made by this witness who's not testifying as hearsay.
Your Honor, this witness is not going to tell the jury. First of all, we're not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted. We're offering it to allow the jury to see what Mr. Sprinkel did in context. He located a certain area.
Let's not say what he did. We need to hear that from the witness.
Okay, so it's provided.
Overruled.
Thank you. So, were you able to see that area described by Mr. Wright on Google Maps?
Yeah, I found an area that I believed he described, yes.
Why were you looking for the area where Mr. Wright described?
Well, specifically, because the area that I believed he described was also captured by the surveillance camera that captured the incident.
Okay.
So if Mr. Wright was where I believed he was based on what he said, then it would be in the surveillance footage. I would see him, or a human-like figure. Given the clarity of the surveillance footage, it wouldn't have been sufficient to actually make out his face, but I would have at least expected to see that.
All right. Did you see Mr. Wright or a human-like figure in that area you were looking at on the surveillance footage?
I did not.
Did you fully capture that area on the still shots that you took down to show to Mr. Wright?
I did.
When did you meet with Mr. Wright?
This would have been January 12th of 2016.
Where did you meet with Mr. Wright?
The Atlanta City Jail.
Now, was Mr. Wright being held on felony or misdemeanor charges?
It's a probation violation on a felony case.
Now, did you offer anything to Mr. Wright in exchange for him speaking with you?
I didn't.
Had, to your knowledge, anything been offered to Mr. Wright by your office in exchange for him speaking with you?
Not to my knowledge.
Was there any insinuation that you would lower his charges or drop his probation warrants?
Not by me.
Okay. Was there any made by anyone associated with you that you have any knowledge of?
No, not to my knowledge. I have absolutely no information to indicate that that ever happened.
Okay. Who went with you when you talked to Mr. Wright?
The aforementioned, the investigator I mentioned yesterday, David White.
How long, do you remember how long you met with Mr. Wright?
Probably maybe like an hour. I audio recorded it, so however long the audio recording is how long I met with him. Well, for in relevant part, and I audio recorded the entire thing. It would probably 45 minutes to an hour and a half, I would expect, somewhere in there.
Did you video record it as well?
I did not. In fact, I brought a voice recorder no, I just brought a pocket voice recorder.
Now, why weren't you in an interview room video recording you all's interaction?
It was actually in a pod, like an inmate dorm at the Atlanta City Jail where Investigator White and I interviewed him. And there's like a little, like a break-off room to the side of the pod, and we just met him in there. There was a table and chairs in there, and we just talked to him.
And were any other inmates around while you talked to him? Present?
Well, they weren't in the room with us. I don't recall if they were out and about in the dorm. But yeah, there were other inmates. I don't recall that any of them were within earshot of us, though.
Not within earshot. Is that what you said?
I don't know. Certainly nothing happened during the interview that alerted me that somebody was listening in. I'll leave it at that. And I don't recall having a feeling at the time that, because I believe I would have. That would have left an impression on me if I thought that others were eavesdropping, and I didn't have any feelings of that sort while I was doing the interview.
Now, how many images did you show to Mr. Wright?
I don't know exactly how many. Let's see. Probably like 15 to 20.
Were all 15 to 20 images that you showed to Mr. Wright?
Probably more like 10 to 15, actually. It's somewhere around there. It was less than 25.
Were all of the images that you showed to Mr. Wright images captured from the barbershop footage in front of which the murder occurred?
Yes, it was Google Earth still shots that just depicted the scene. Okay. And still shots from the barbershop surveillance footage.
Starting with the Google Earth still shots that depicted the scene, what did you do with those still shots?
I printed them out prior to going into the interview.
And when you showed them to Spencer Wright, given that they weren't from the actual night of the murder, what were you doing with them?
Well, given that the scene had remained, from the time the murder happened to the time that the Google Earth vehicle photographed the scene had remained unchanged. In other words, the lay of the land was essentially the same. Mm-hmm. My objective was for Mr. Wright to identify where both he was and other parties were at various times during when he witnessed the incident, according to him.
Okay. So was Mr. Wright, without saying where or what he said, but was he able to point out an area that he was claiming to have been at?
Yes, he did.
And was that area also captured in the surveillance footage from the barbershop?
It was.
Now, was the lighting the same on the Google Maps images that you showed him as it was on the night of the murder that was captured on surveillance? No,
because the Google Map images were captured during daylight hours, whereas the homicide occurred during just after nightfall or during twilight hours.
Were there any identifiable landmarks in the area that you were interested in regarding Mr. Wright that were clearly depicted on the Google Earth printouts?
Well, what?
Stationary objects.
Well, there was a bench, yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
And where was that bench located?
It was located at a bus stop.
Where?
Where's the bus stop?
Yes.
It's across the street from 330 McDaniel Street.
Okay. About how far from 330 McDaniel Street?
However wide the street is, I don't know, 30 yards, 40 yards.
Okay.
Because it wasn't like directly across the street. I mean, it was sufficient that it was captured within the surveillance footage, but it was kind of, I guess it depends on how you define across. It was definitely across the street, but if we're going through the front door of the barbershop, it wasn't directly across the street from the front door. It's kind of like diagonal.
Diagonal?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Is that bench visible on the surveillance footage?
It is.
Were you interested in looking at a particular time on the surveillance footage after listening to Mr. Wright's interview and speaking with him yourself?
I was.
And what particular time were you interested in looking at?
Well, time is in a constant here because there's the time that I believe the incident happened, and then there's the timestamp on the video, which differed.
Okay. And so let's start with the time that the incident happened. If it's different than the time on the video, how do you go about finding what time to look at?
Well, I'm watching the video. If you, in this case, you have a surveillance video, and the incident of which we're speaking is prominently featured when you watch that video. So I could just watch the video and wait for that incident to occur, and that's when I knew that the portion of the video that I was viewing was relevant insofar as it depicted the incident, regardless of the timestamp emblazoned thereon.
And during that time that you're looking at the video, are you able to discern where that bench at the bus stop is in relation to where the shooting occurred?
Like it was about, like I said, across the street, not directly across the street, but probably across the street and maybe 20 to 30 yards to the right if you're facing across the street from the barbershop.
Did Mr. Wright recognize the bench in the surveillance footage, or were you able to show him the bench in the surveillance footage?
In Your Honor, calls for hearsay and also confrontation clause.
Sustained.
I would withdraw that. Did you ever see Mr. Wright in any part of the surveillance footage of the murder, or someone fitting his description anywhere near that bench? And by anywhere near, I mean sitting on or within 1 foot of the bench during the time of the murder?
No, there were no human-like figures around the bench. I saw a cat at one point.
You saw what?
It looked to be a cat.
A cat. You could see a cat on the surveillance video?
Yeah, that's what struck me. It wasn't real high fidelity, but it was the light was bright enough and the fidelity was sufficient to see a feline moseying around the bench. But there was unambiguously there were no people around the bench.
Did you check the surveillance maybe like a few minutes or minutes after and minutes before the murder, just to see if perhaps there was a human at that bench?
Oh yeah, I'm sure I did. I watched that footage many, many times. Of course, the most relevant period to me was the time when the incident actually occurred. But no, I didn't see a human at that bench.
And how many times did you watch that video?
I didn't keep count, but it would have been many, 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 many times. So at least 150 to, I don't know. It was many times.
Why did you watch the video so many times?
To see every time every time I watched, I was hoping to see something maybe I hadn't noticed before, the way the light bounces off one of the vehicles, because that was a big part for me. I wanted to figure out what sort of vehicles we were dealing with here. I actually had the video enhanced at one point because, like I said, the video wasn't very high quality. So yeah, I had to kind of try to fill in the blanks myself. And that's why I viewed it so many times. And also just I always would hope. A lot of times it would probably just be in futility, but I would always hope to see something I hadn't seen before.
Now, when you said you had the video enhanced, would you tell the jury what you mean? I mean, when you say enhanced, what did you do?
I sent it off to private corporate companies or individual. There were two. It was Target, like the retail store. They have a division within their company that deals with surveillance footage, and they at the time, maybe they still do, but they at the time they would digitally enhance surveillance videos. And there was another gentleman named Walter Pineda who offered the same services. He was an individual.
Why did you send it out to two different places?
Just, I guess the more the better.
Were either of those places able to allow you to see anything more clearly in the video?
A little bit. Yeah, it helped a little bit. Yeah, it's digital. And so there's really only so much they can do to clean it up. It's just ones and zeros. But they are programs that can, I guess, kind of filter out some of the noise from the picture and that kind of thing. And that's what they did. So it helped a little bit.
Now, is it unusual for you to take surveillance footage in unindicted cases you receive from law enforcement officers and send it off to other agencies to have it, to see if you could have it enhanced at all?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled.
It is actually, I think this is the only case I've ever actually done that on.
And why then did you choose to do it on this case?
Because the video was so important and I really needed to identify as much as I could in that video.
Now, was this, when you say the video was so important, was this particular homicide case for you any more important than the others or any others that you worked on, the case itself?
No, it wasn't any more important. Any case, it got more attention because for my purposes, it was essentially unsolved right when I got it. And so that elevates the priority of any homicide case. Now, I wouldn't say priority isn't the right word. It really isn't. It's just the amount of time that I'm going to spend on it certainly goes way up.
Okay. And when you said it got more attention because it was unsolved, how often did you get unsolved cases in your capacity as an unindicted homicide?
Objection,
relevance.
Overruled.
Not very often, thankfully. The police don't normally make charges on
Relevant and non-responsive.
Sustained.
Okay. So,
Sustained.
all right. When you say not often, can you tell the jury approximately how many unsolved homicide cases you've worked with during your time? And it doesn't have to be an exact number. Just approximately. Because my follow-up question is going to rely on.
Maybe 20 to 30 truly unsolved cases.
In those other 20 to 30 cases, did you perform acts or investigations in the same manner that you performed your investigation or further investigation of this particular case?
I did.
And did that include seeking out witnesses that had not previously been identified?
That is correct.
Did that also include finding jail calls
It
that
did.
had not been identified?
It did.
Did it include going out to scenes?
It did.
Did it include interviewing people who had already been interviewed?
It did.
And with those other cases, did you include, as part of the case file, recordings that you conducted, recordings of persons that you conducted interviews with?
Yes.
And did you include any cell phone data, jail calls, social media, things of that nature that you found during your independent investigation of the case?
I did.
And after you got the video enhanced of the barbershop, did you review any other, or I should say, did you review any other video besides the barbershop video?
I did. There was that video from the Texaco station. I reviewed that.
The video from the Texaco station, were you familiar with how to work that system when you first got it?
Well, I didn't, when you say system, I didn't receive the original recording apparatus.
Okay.
But the software, yes. Yes, I mean, I figured it out and was able to view the video.
When you first got that video, was the timestamp on that video the same? In other words, was the time on that video the same or different than the time on the barbershop video?
From what I recall, the barbershop surveillance video is considerably more accurate than the video from, or excuse me, the Texaco station video is considerably more accurate than the barbershop video, if not entirely accurate.
Okay. So if it was different, how were you able to look at the Texaco video and determine anything as it relates to what was happening on the barbershop?
So the frames there are certain parts of the frames that overlapped. So in other words, so you had a camera at the barbershop that was capturing the street, and then you had a camera mounted over at the Texaco that was also capturing that same street, and the two cameras were capturing part of the same part of the street. So if I saw something happening in one frame, I could just marry it up to the from the image caught by the other camera. And if I had, for example, and that's how I would be able to tell. So in other words, I wasn't using the timestamp, particularly in the barbershop, since the timestamp was wonky. But even if the timestamp looks correct, it could still be a few seconds off, you know. So I was mostly things that were constants to me were like vehicles driving by the scene, or when gunshots ring out, you know, I would look for that. So so on the Texaco footage, I don't recall exactly. There was a blue car that came into the gas station. There was something that was captured on both cameras that I was able to use as a marking point to sync up the two pieces of footage.
Okay. When you were reviewing the Texaco footage, did you only look at the time frame that you thought that the murder occurred?
No, I particularly as I continued my review, I looked at probably like 30 or 40 minutes before the murder occurred. I looked at the entire piece of footage.
We're going to come back to the Texaco footage, but I want to ask you, after looking at the Texaco footage, did you do anything to identify persons or objects that you saw in the Texaco footage?
I did.
Would you tell the jury how you went about identifying certain persons and objects? And if you need me to clarify, ask me to clarify.
Well, there was, and without getting into, all right. So there was an event that occurred on the video. First thing is that I was looking for something specifically that, based on other evidence in the case, I'll just keep it broad or general here. Based on other evidence of the case, I suspected I was going to see on the video. And then as I watched the video during that time frame, I did in fact see what I thought I was going to see.
You did or did not?
I did.
Okay.
And it was a vehicle specifically. There was a certain vehicle, and when I saw it, based on other things that I had seen, and specifically I'm talking about social media records, photos, and cell phone tower data, I thought I wonder if this person is at the gas station. And when I looked at the footage, I said, oh, well, I recognize that vehicle from social media. And then as I continued to watch the footage, I recognized one of the people that was inside. It was a passenger in that vehicle because that person walked into the store. and they got close to the camera. And because they were close to an interior surveillance camera in a well-lit store, I was able to see their face. And then as other things happened around this vehicle that I recognized in the footage, I complete investigative tasks to figure out who the other people were. I already knew who one of the people was, the person that was driving the vehicle, or I had a strong suspicion as to who was driving the vehicle I was looking for based on cell phone records and social media photos and videos. So I already knew right when I saw it. I had a pretty good idea. I knew for a fact who one of the person was, and the person that was driving the vehicle, I had a pretty good idea who it was.
All right, let's unpack a little bit of that. Now, what vehicle were you looking for?
It was a 2002 Pontiac Bonneville.
What color?
Gray.
Why were you looking for, better yet, did you have a particular reason for seeking out that vehicle?
Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
I haven't asked him what anybody said.
I mean, I don't know what the answer's gonna be, but it potentially could.
Let me tighten it up then. Was there a particular person of interest to you based on what you had learned during your investigation up to that point?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Were you looking for any particular gray Pontiac Bonneville?
There was one particular gray Pontiac Bonneville that I was interested in, yes.
All right. And who did that Pontiac Bonneville belong to?
Either belonged to or is associated with a man named Javoris Bradford.
Is there a nickname for Javoris Bradford?
Tuda, T-U-D-A.
All right. Now, did you attempt to locate any social media footage that related to Javoris Bradford or Tuda?
I did.
Would you please turn to the jury and tell the jury how you went about locating social media accounts associated with Javoris Bradford or Tuda?
Well, I just searched for him probably on Facebook first, because particularly back then it was easier. And I either found him or a family member on Facebook, and then browsing the family member's profile. And this may not be exactly how I did it, because I don't recall exactly how I found Mr. Bradford's Instagram page. But somehow or another because on Instagram he went by the moniker I'm_living_great at the time. Mm-hmm. And so basically on probably starting at Facebook, finding family members, fanning out, and then on finding him on Facebook, finding maybe where he screenshot an Instagram page and pasted it to his Facebook. That would be how I would have found his Instagram page somehow. And then, and like I said, his Instagram name was I'm_living_great.
And did he have himself depicted in that Instagram footage?
I'm going to object. That's hearsay.
Overruled.
What did he have himself depicted in that social media footage or social media information that you saw with any kind of vehicle in particular?
Yes, it was a 2002 Pontiac Bonneville.
Gray?
It was.
Okay. Did you ever discern or gain a number for Tuda? Did you ever learn of a phone number for Tuda?
I did, pretty early on, actually.
Where did you get the phone number from for Tuda?
So I testified previously about how I...
But don't talk about your previous testimony. Have you ever testified in front of this jury?
Yes. Yeah, that was something I said like earlier today.
Okay. So without referring to the fact that you previously testified, just tell the jury.
No, I'm talking about like previous testimony like a few minutes ago.
Okay, go ahead. Tell the jury.
All right. So one of the ways I find jail calls is I go through phone records that I had in the case. And in this case, I had some phone records. Right. And I don't recall whose phone records it was exactly. But I just started running numbers from that appeared in the phone records, whether they be numbers that were called by the handset, the records of which I was reviewing, or numbers that called that handset. It didn't matter to me, just whatever. I was running them through the jail call database, and one of those, because like I said, I was trying to get intel. It wasn't just obviously on the night of the shooting, the murder. Yeah, I mean, I would expect that the people that committed weren't in the Fulton County jail, so I obviously wasn't looking for inmates to be saying that they did it.
Okay.
But I was trying to get for intel from people that maybe were being called from inmates, and one of those numbers was 404-957-8008, and I'm flipping through these discs to make sure to refresh my recollection.
Okay.
To make sure that I'm citing that. Yes, that is right. 404-957-8008 was one of the numbers that appeared in those phone records and that I ran through the jail call database. And on doing so, I did find calls that I deemed relevant that were placed on the night of the homicide from an inmate inside the jail.
So, Madam Court Reporter, and I suspect some of the jurors has informed me that you are speaking a little too fast. Do you mind slowing down and saying what you just said one more time?
Yes, I found a number inside within the phone call logs that were obtained by the Atlanta Police Department for one of the parties of interest, whether it be a person of interest or a witness or a defendant, whoever it may have been. And it didn't matter to me. All I wanted were numbers from the phone numbers of people that may have known something about the homicide and may have been called either on the night of the murder, the day after the murder, 2 days after the murder, whenever they were called.
You're getting really fast again with
All
the
right.
way you're talking, so try to slow down.
All right. And one of those numbers of the many that I ran was 404-957-8008. I ran it through the jail call database, and I found that there were 2 calls I was able to retrieve anyway. I think at least 2
Okay.
that were placed to that number on the night of the murder from an inmate inside the Fulton County Jail, and they were placed after the 8 o'clock p.m. hour.
Okay.
I think they're maybe between 8 and 9 p.m. that evening.
Now, why did that particular piece of information have any value to your investigation?
What piece of information exactly?
That there were 2 calls made to that number by an inmate at the jail on the night of the murder, around 8, or at the time you specified.
Well, I listened to the calls, and it sounded to me like they were talking about the homicide.
All right. So, were you able to identify who it was that was inside the jail that was making the call to that number?
I did.
How did you identify who it was inside the jail making the call to 404-957-8008?
Well, I believe, would you like me to say the name?
Well, number one, I would at some point, but hold on before you do. And let me ask you this. If you need to refresh your memory with any part of your report, would you just alert us that you're doing so and go ahead and read whatever you need to read?
Okay.
Do you need to refresh your memory at all?
No.
Okay. How did you learn the name of the person inside the jail?
It was placed from the account of the inmate.
Okay. And how were you able to determine that the person's whose name was on the account is the actual person who's making the call?
Well, I gained familiarity with his voice by listening to other phone calls that the inmate made to persons that were well known to him. And then I later confirmed it by just like listening to the call with the inmate.
Okay.
He affirmed it.
All right. So tell the jury who it was that was inside the jail.
Martinez Arnold.
And does Martinez Arnold, to your knowledge, go by any other name?
Duke.
All right. At the time that Martinez Arnold was inside the jail, and what date was that you are talking about? January?
It was January 10th, the phone call. It was January 10th, 2015.
During that time, do you have any information about what color Mr. Martinez Arnold's hair may have been?
At the time that he placed the phone call?
No, around the time of early 2015, do you know whether or not, if you don't, that's fine. Do you know anything about color of his hair?
No.
All right. So once you listened to the calls, did you attempt to get any more calls made from the Fulton County Jail?
I did. I download a lot of jail calls on this case.
What jail calls, how did you go about deciding which jail calls in this case you were going to download?
Well, I tend to be over. I'll download because the jail calls don't reside on the server, the Securus Corporation server forever. I try to err on the side of just downloading them. So as I ran those numbers through the Fulton County Jails database, any calls that came back on the numbers from this phone, like the phone records, I just download them. But what would prompt me to pay particular attention to them is if they were placed in close temporal proximity to the homicide. Certainly a call placed like an hour or two after the homicide would be something I'd want to listen to. Also, I downloaded calls of the defendants that they placed following their arrests at the Fulton County Jail. I put those in the file as well.
Okay. And at the time that you were looking for the phone number and confirming, you picked up something in front of you. What is it that you have on this stack of items in front of you?
Those are just, I burned all of the jail calls. Not every single jail call that I download during but most of, I tried to confine or memorialize as much as I could to this report that I testified about earlier today. That's 140 pages long. And as I went through the report,
the answer is non-responsive to the question.
Listen to the question and try to focus on answering the question that's asked.
I'm also going to object to the relevance of the length of his report.
Sustained.
What is it that those are in front of you?
they're just the jail calls that I testified to downloading and interviews that I conducted. I burned them to disk.
Okay. And the one that you picked up, to refresh your memory about the 404-957-8008, would you pick that up?
Okay. Here we go.
I'm going to show you what I have now labeled as 500 wide.
Mm-hmm.
That's the disc that you just handled.
Yeah, yes, this is a disc that I created yesterday.
Okay.
That's my handwriting, and in fact, I signed the disc with my signature.
Okay.
This is a disc that contains the jail calls to 404-957-8008 that I downloaded.
Now, when you said that you downloaded it yesterday, do you keep all of the jail calls that you download in a particular case somewhere where you can later copy it to a disk, or what
They're on a server. My case file, all the case files are on a server. They're all digital. They're just stored on a computer.
Okay. Had the name Javaris Bradford come up in the case file that you received from Detective Thorpe?
No.
And do you recall approximately how long after you received the case file from Detective Thorpe that you became interested in the name Jabari Gray?
It would have been on or around January 10th, 2016, when I found the jail calls that are on State's Exhibit 5004.
I think that's 500Y.
Oh, 500Y, excuse me. All right.
Thank you, Judge. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Terrible handwriting. What about the name Martinez Arnold? Did you know about that name? Was that name in Detective Thorpe's case file that he gave to you?
That I don't recall. I don't know that I don't recall if he was in the case file or not.
Let me ask a better question. At the time you received the case file from Detective Thorpe, was the name Martinez Arnold of any interest to you in this investigation?
I don't recall.
Did you note anywhere in your report whether or not it was?
I'm sure I referenced him in my report insofar as he was the inmate that placed the call that became of interest to me. But as far, I'll just say this: he was in jail on the night of the murder.
Okay. Before downloading those calls, did you know he was in jail on the night of the murder?
I don't know if I knew or not.
Okay. After you downloaded those calls from the night of the murder, did you find any other numbers of interest to you in this investigation?
Numbers.
Phone numbers. Did you find or locate any other phone numbers or persons that were of interest to you?
Yes.
What phone numbers did you find?
Well, yeah, I get there was a number. There was a lot of. I mean, I remember doing quite a few search warrants for cell phone numbers and focusing on cell phone numbers or records that had been obtained by the police department.
Okay. So going back to the way you described obtaining information to conduct more investigations, did you follow the practice that you ordinarily follow in terms of search warrants to get more information, to gather or follow up on information you learned?
Yes.
All right. With respect to Spencer Wright, did you ever see any jail calls from him?
I did.
All right. Now, where did you look to find jail calls from?
For Spencer Wright?
Yes.
Well, I wasn't able to look for the jail calls myself for him. They were on a different system because he was at the Atlanta City Jail, so I reached out to someone there and asked them to pull them for me.
So thank you for clarifying that. Is reaching out to someone at a different facility with access to calls you don't have access to something that you did only in this case, or is that a practice that you follow to get information?
No, I've done that on other cases. That's not uncommon.
And if you would slow down and speak into the mic and to the jury, say that.
Yes, I've reached out to other facilities, jails and prisons, correctional facilities in the past to obtain calls, recorded calls placed by the inmates that I don't have direct access by way of a login and password at some website.
Okay. And so when you reached out to the Atlanta City Jail, what information were you trying to get if you didn't know or have Spencer Wright's jail calls or phone number? What were you trying to get?
I just wanted to see what Spencer Wright, I wanted to hear, I should say, what Spencer Wright was saying to people after his arrest in October of 2015.
And did you ask for a specific time frame of calls or just all of the calls? What did you ask?
From what I recall, I asked for all the calls that had been made from his account since the beginning of his incarceration at the Atlanta City Jail. And then I believe I also had a few phone numbers that I wanted to run, that I asked them to run queries specifically in the event that he utilized another inmate's account to call that number.
So that's interesting. So when you say in the event he utilized another inmate's phone number, where did you get the phone numbers that you wanted them to run to see if he was using another inmate's phone number?
That I don't remember.
All right.
It probably just phone numbers that they're probably just it may have been the same phone numbers that I ran through the Fulton County jail database. Not knowing who Mr. Wright knew or he didn't know, I'm sure I just thought, just out of curiosity, run all these numbers. Maybe I had a phone number for a family member that I found.
Did you follow the same procedure you used in all of your other unindicted homicides?
I did.
In terms of running those numbers?
I did.
All right. Did you have jail calls, since this was 2016 that you're looking for these, did you have jail calls for Spencer Wright that went back into 2015?
I believe so. Yes, I did.
And did you find a phone number? And if you don't recall, let me know and I'll refer you to your report. And I can actually, so that it is preserved for the record. Just label this. I'm going to label, Your Honor, just for the purposes of the record, 501 Yankee Romeo. And it's a report that we have previously